Dawn.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. This is Dawn Harris, and I'm founder and president of Revelation Gardens. And I just want to, before I jump into our weekly Paws podcast, remind you of our scripture. We have a founding scripture. It's Revelation 21:4, and it says, "He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." And just quickly, a little bit about Revelation Gardens. We are a nonprofit animal cat and dog rescue based in Benton County, Tennessee. And we exist to help pets that have been surrendered, abandoned, abused to have sanctuary until the perfect adopter is found. We also help pet owners with various resources so that more pets can stay in the home. So I'm excited that we have a guest today. Jennifer Perdue is going to be speaking with us about caring for cats with heart disease. February is heart disease. It's actually American Heart Month, and the focus is all things related to heart health. And so I wanted to bring that to the table, so to speak, regarding pets. Well, Jennifer is one of our board members. She's actually our treasurer. So she's an officer with our board. And so welcome, Jennifer. I'm so excited that you're here with us today.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Had a few technical issues, but we're all squared away now and ready to share some things with you. So let's just jump right in. So just tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to becoming involved in caring for cats with heart disease.
So I have had cats pretty much my entire life. And Peter was our first cat that we had with heart failure. And it kind of happened really overnight. So we went to bed one night. He was perfectly fine. He had eaten his dinner. He was very energetic and interacting with everybody. And I woke up the next day and his breathing was extremely labored
Wow.
and he hadn't eaten it at all. And it was so severe that I did not wait for our vet to open and I took him right to the pet ER because I could like his breathing was extremely elevated. And that began our journey of about 12 months with him.
Wow. So sorry to hear that you went through all that. I know it can get really emotional dealing with loss in particular, but going through all the medical pieces too.
Yeah.
Just, yeah. It must have been really hard just starting. So, all of a sudden like that. It was a little bit similar with Lucamax, but I'm going to let you continue. Um, so tell us a little bit about your experience in caring for him and any others that you may have cared for, and maybe some of the challenges that you faced doing that.
Okay. It's actually quite interesting because Peter was our first, but I have since had three more cats diagnosed with heart failure. And none of them were like Peter's journey. And we found out that one was actually an allergic reaction that mimicked heart failure. But Peter's journey was very, very different and very specific. I kept him at the pet ER for about 2 hours until our vet opened, and then I took him to our regular vet. And the vet had kind of gone over what he thought was going on, which, we had thought, of course, was heart failure at that point. He recommended that I leave him there with him for the day and had kind of asked if we wanted to see a cat cardiologist, which he said was very pricey, but he didn't really think it was necessary. I trusted our vet intently at that time and, told him that if he didn't think it was necessary, then we weren't going to go through with it. He called me later that day and told me that Peter had progressed, um, or not progressed in a good way. He had gotten much worse, and that it was a very complicated case, and he recommended seeing a cat cardiologist. So we ended up seeing a cat cardiologist that day. And she answered a ton of our questions, told us that Peter had about 6 to 12 months if we could get his heart failure under control. He wasn't just in heart disease at that point, he was already in heart failure. It had happened so fast.
Does she know
Um,
why it happened so fast?
they
Just
they don't know. I actually was quite surprised. I had talked to my vet and asked him why he thought that Peter was so young. Peter was 12 at the time, and he said most cats get heart failure when they're 5 to 6 years old. So for the fact that Peter was 12 was already abnormal. And we still don't know what happened. We don't know what brought it on. We don't know what it was about. Obviously, the first indication to me that something was wrong was his labored breathing. I didn't quite know what it was, but they gave him Lasix, of course. And I had to go back and look through some of my posts because this happened so long ago. They had removed, I think they said 10 milliliters of fluid around his heart. Um, and for anybody who doesn't know, a normal cat respiratory, because we had to do a lot of breath monitoring or breathing monitoring, we had to, that was going to be the first sign that something was, again, much worse, or that maybe he was having more troubles once we got him under control. So when you're measuring cat breaths per minute, a normal cat should have 20 to 30 breaths per minute, and Peter's was about 70. So it was obvious. It was very obvious. We actually had a very similar situation with Animal back in 2020. I woke up one morning, his was very, very bad. They diagnosed him with heart failure. Again, that turned out to be something different. An allergic reaction, which I found out can mimic heart failure. So, um, but anyway, with Peter, um, we ended up putting him on 5 different medications, to try to, a lot of them were to help his heart work better, to constantly remove that fluid. Um, he was on Lasix, became the miracle drug, basically. A lot of people that I spoke with afterwards were really surprised because they said that Lasix basically just removes fluid, but that's exactly what it needed. Every time he was having an episode or having difficulty breathing, we would give him more Lasix. And if his breathing went back to normal and he showed better progress, then we knew that that was okay. He had some med tweaks and whatnot along that time, but the one thing that he kept having was blood clots constantly in his back legs, especially to the point where they became unusable. And the vet had told us, especially in the very early days, Pete's blood pressure was extremely low, so low that they could not get a reading. They couldn't find a pulse in any of his feet. And they had said that if we could not get him to eat and if we could not get his blood pressure up, he would go into organ failure. Um, so that was our first obstacle with that, and getting him on those meds and whatnot helped. And we did get him to eat, and we did get his blood pressure up. He went back for a checkup. The vet was astounded with his progress. And then again, throughout the 12-month period, he kind of had these constant blood clots. He kept throwing blood clots, and I could tell sometimes he was in a lot of pain. They're apparently very, very painful, but my vet would put him on pain meds, and he seemed to do okay. I found out years later after the fact that blood clots are not normal, although they can be part of heart failure. They don't usually throw a blood clot. And if they do, it's usually pretty fatal, or it's like at the end of the disease. Peter kept throwing so many. It was like every 2 months or so, he'd have another blood clot, and it was just so abnormal. But then he always rallied. He would rally and come back and just be back to his typical loving self. So that was kind of what we were dealing with throughout this. Kind of dealing with trying to get his blood pressure under control, getting him to eat, getting him stable, making sure he remains stable, and kind of dealing with these blood clots that he just kept having.
So what did you do? You said that you got him to eat and brought his, got his blood pressure up. Um, so were there certain things that you did to get that to achieve that?
I think it was just a matter of getting him on the meds. I think getting that fluid drained from around his heart really helped him to feel better. And so he started eating from there.
We went through something really similar with Luca Max. So he was fine, and then all of a sudden he was dragging his legs, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. But it was identified at that point that he had a heart condition, and so we got him on medication. And I the vet thinks that he had a blood clot that went into the branch, and I'm not sure which branch. And but the medication cleared that, helped the flow, or helped to break
Yeah.
it up, or both. And he's able to use his legs now.
Yeah.
But there was a period of time where he wasn't eating, and he was just working so hard to breathe. It
Yeah.
was because of the fluid, and so the medication truly helped him. So, um, everything that you've been through, looking back, is there anything that you might could pass on um, to pet owners that are having an early or have just had a diagnosis for their pet, their cat, or um, you know, have been going through for a little while, but may not have had the resolution that you've had with getting him to eat and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I obviously we tried a bunch of different foods. Obviously eating besides getting his blood pressure up, the vet said that the next thing was obviously eating. Those were the two things that we were dealing with within a 24-hour period, and eating was going to help his blood pressure. So we tried a bunch of different foods, whatever he wanted to eat, basically. I just shoved everything at him, hoping. I had a friend sometime after Peter's situation who had a cat diagnosed with heart failure, and she decided not to try any of the meds. I don't recall what the reasoning was, but Peter, the two that I remember at this point, Peter was on Lasix and Vetmedin, and they were both crucial. I know he was on three other medications. Um, I think he started off at four, and then we had to put a fifth one on, and he was on a medication to help blood clots, and things like that. So, if make sure you have a vet that you trust explicitly. I mean, anything that my vet told me, I was going to listen to. It wasn't. I had been with him so long that I trusted him 100%. And um, I don't know that the cat cardiologist really brought anything new to the table, but that he was not able to tell me. But so, obviously have a vet that you trust. And if they're recommending meds, I mean that's obviously the best treatment at this point. Even back then, that's what it was, and it helped. It helped tremendously. I mean, it was visible in his breathing alone.
How did he do with the medications? Were they pills?
They were pills. Peter was
Yes.
difficult. And my husband was out of town for work a lot at the time. And so I kind of had to figure out a way to do it. He got to the point where he knew when med time was and would bolt. He would hide under the bed and upstairs and downstairs. One thing that we did with Animal when we had to pill him was have a routine, but make it something that he would look forward to. So he would get his meds, but then immediately he would get treats afterwards. And that's what we started doing with Peter. So it got to the point where they actually would seek me out, knowing that it was med time, a bummer. They hate taking meds, but it was going to mean treats afterwards. And one of the things that we actually did for Animal was we bought gelatin caps so that we could basically put as many of his pills into one thing as we could rather than having to take, like with Peter, he was on five different meds, obviously, and Vetmedin was pretty big. So he would have to take Vetmedin by itself. But even with Peter, we did the same thing. We would consolidate as many of the small ones as we could into one gelatin cap. So he would only basically have to take two meds two times a day. In his head, it was two pills. And that helped to bring down the stress level. And then of course, lots of treats afterwards.
That's a good approach. I never considered that. So with Max, when I was giving him medication, I thought he was doing great. I thought he was, they were going in and everything was great. And I had a rug in his area that was shag. And one day I noticed there
Oh
was a bunch of
no.
pills in the
Oh no.
shag. So he had been spitting them out and I didn't notice.
Oh, Luke.
So we resolved it. One, because he was moved over to the annex and there was volunteers giving him medication, and it was hard to give him a pill, but
Yeah.
also because he, had a history of faking us out.
Yeah.
So we started crushing them up and
Okay.
adding a little bit of water and taking an oral syringe and then giving it to him. And he
Okay.
does just fine with it. In fact, I don't know if it's the extra attention he gets or what, but he seems to look forward to it and he has
Yeah.
no problems taking it. So that was how we resolved it. I never considered doing, like a gelatin capsule. That's a smart idea too. But this worked for us. It works for him, and he's not able to fake us out. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a good idea too. And it's interesting because one of the things that I had read was I don't remember exactly word for word, but basically when you are taking care of a sick pet, a lot of your attention goes to them and it makes your bond so much stronger. And it was 100% true. I think Peter really appreciated the extra attention that he got and all the time that I spent with him. Um, and I'm sure that Luca Max probably feels the same way.
yeah, well, at the beginning of this journey with Luca Max, he was over at our sanctuary, which is where I live, and we'd sleep together every night. So we
Yeah.
really bonded during that time. But then he started peeing. I didn't realize it for a little while, but we had, the exercise, like the yoga mats that
Hmm.
interlock. I had a bunch of those down because it's an oak floor and I wanted to protect the floor. Well, I didn't realize it, but he was peeing between the cracks and
Oh
it got
no.
under the mat and it ruined the oak floor. So I brought him down here where that couldn't happen. And he's in, the alley cap flat, that building. And so he can't ruin the floor. It has a rubber floor. But so when he came down here, we're still bonded, but he now is open up to having more socialization, which I think is a really good component.
Yeah.
And but what I was going to say is when he was over there at the sanctuary and this all first started, the beginning of his journey, and his legs, he's dragging his legs. It was heartbreaking. But then watching him heal from that and the medication working, it truly was bonding. And um, just watching that whole recovery process. And he's
Yeah.
really stable. He's doing great.
How
So
long
really
is he,
cool.
how long ago was he diagnosed?
That's a really good question. Um, I don't actually know. I could pull his file and tell you exactly, but I'm going to guess 9 months, maybe a year.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't remember exactly, but I'm feeling like it's around that timeline. And he's on twice a day
Yep.
medications every 12 hours. And in fact, I just got a refill today. So that's one of our challenges as a rescue because it's about $50 a month. So that is it. So yeah, it's accidentally hit the stop recording button. So here we are again.
Hopefully you can merge them.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I remember watching Peter not being able to use his legs was heartbreaking, just like you said. And I remember talking to my vet about it, and he said it probably bothered me more than it bothered Peter. Peter was able to do just fine. Although with Luca Max, it sounds like both of his legs went out at the same time. Peter usually went from one back leg to the other. So um he was able to jump up in our bed and he was able to jump out of bed and he was able to jump up in the windows and still kind of do everything. He just had this one poor limp leg during these moments. Of having a blood clot, but it didn't, once we got him on pain meds for that, not something that he needed to be on all the time, but whenever he threw a blood clot, he didn't seem to bother him at all.
yeah, I remember being so worried about trying to get him to eat too. And I tried that special AD formula that
Hmm.
high protein, easy to digest. I tried what I ended up landing on was tuna. He loves tuna.
Yeah.
And So that was all he ate for a period of time, but at least he was getting some nutrients in. But it's so worrying. I mean, it was so stressful because I worried so much about him. And
Yeah.
I know other pet owners that may have a recent diagnosis. It can be really, really stressful. So, do you have any ideas or things you can share about what maybe a pet owner might need to know about early detection and some of the signs? I mean, you talked about just the breathing, but can you think of anything else that might be good to share about what you witnessed?
Yeah, I mean with Peter and with Animal, it really it was the breathing 100%. We didn't have any other signs. And it was just like you just know your pet. You just know what a normal breathing is. And both times with Peter and Animal, when I woke up, they were both very, very labored. And both times I said this is an emergency and took him to the pet ER. Um, and obviously, very lethargic, and not eating, but it was all kind of bundled. The lethargy and lack of appetite can spawn so many different things. The breathing was number one first thing for me. Animal had been diagnosed previously with a heart murmur. I don't believe Peter had. I don't know what the statistics are of one leading into another. Again,
Mhm.
animals turned out not to be heart failure at the end of the day. It was an allergic reaction to the steroids, but that stemmed from his heart murmur. So, but both times it was um just that rapid breathing, that very hard, difficult breathing that you can actually see them kind of straining to get enough air.
Yeah, that's definitely difficult. And of course, in our case, and it sounds like was the leg dragging later, or was that right off in the
No,
beginning for you?
yeah, no, Peter's blood clots came later. It was about a week in. He initially they knew that his blood pressure was very low. His feet were purple. And they, like I said, they couldn't find a pulse at all. There was just
That's
no,
crazy.
yeah, it was, and they were cold to the touch, because his blood pressure was just so low. But he didn't blow a clot until about a week in, and I took him back to the vet and whatnot. But that wasn't something that happened instantaneously with the breathing. It was that came along later after the fact.
For me, it was the legs that were dragging. That was my first. And then as I
Gotcha.
started, you know, listening to the vet and observing more closely, then, the breathing was obvious. But that wasn't the first thing I noticed.
Huh.
Um, so are there any misconceptions that you've heard of regarding heart disease in cats that maybe you could shed some light on? I can't think of any personally, but you may have known or heard of some that I know oftentimes people they think when a cat has a disease like that they just want to put them down. That could be a misconception, but can't really think of anything. Can you? That maybe.
No, I couldn't either when I was thinking about it. It wasn't, I mean, my vet, 100% said Peter doesn't seem to be in suffering. He seems to be very, very happy because we had that discussion. Is this something that we should pursue, or is this something that we should, look into euthanasia? And especially, when the cardiologist gave us a 6 to 12 month, I mean, even with all of Peter's ups and downs, he made it just over 12 months. Um, and I mean, I would redo that journey, 100 more times if I had to. It wasn't, if I had to go back in time, I wouldn't choose euthanasia or anything like that. Once you get past all the moving parts and the initial diagnosis and kind of get the med tweak just right and everything, it just becomes part of a daily routine. And Peter was able to live a happy life again with some ups and downs along the way. But it
Course.
definitely
Yeah.
wasn't a death sentence by any means. Not like when you hear heart disease or heart failure, it certainly sounds that way. But there's a lot of different things that they can do now with the different meds out there.
My experience is the same, that it's definitely manageable. And I think what you said about getting a veterinarian or working with your veterinarian that you trust is crucial.
Yeah.
And especially, when there's ongoing medication and, um, for Leukamax, it's a lifetime, for
Yeah.
the duration they'll be on medication. So I think that was a really good thing that you said about having a vet that you trust. And you're right, there's a lot of things that can be done now with medications that can really help a cat and probably a dog too continue living a good quality of life. Luca Max is doing really well. He's stable. I don't know how long he has, but he's stable and he's got a good quality of life. And that's what it's all about, especially in the
Yeah.
rescue world,
Yeah,
keeping them
absolutely.
safe and happy. Hmm.
Yeah. And I do have I have a friend whose dog is currently in heart failure, and he's on the same meds, Lasix, and or supposed to be. He's supposed to be on Lasix and vet med, and turns out he doesn't take those meds at all, and it actually started creating digestive issues. But my point was just even if it's dogs, it's kind of the same meds as far as I know, at least from her standpoint. She was given at least two of the same meds that we were on for cats. So I know that they're safe for both.
Yeah. Well, wow, what you went through with your kitties. I'm sure that you just really helped them to feel safe, even though they were going through all of that.
Yeah.
One, an allergic reaction, which is a different, but had some of the similar um,
Hmm.
symptoms and experiences. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
mhm.
And the only reason that I brought that up was because labored breathing, always an emergency, I think, especially to that extent, doesn't always mean heart failure.
Yeah.
He was diagnosed with heart failure, but he is very, very, very skittish. And I was the only one who could give him his meds. And I started realizing we started doing vacations of like 2 days to see how long he could go without meds. And then as we did longer and longer, I started realizing that he was exactly the same, whether he had his meds or not. And that's when I realized that it was probably a misdiagnosis. Um, and it was in fact the steroid shot that had sent him into this kind of allergic reaction. Um, so, that turned, it's literally it's over 4 years later now, and he hasn't been on his meds, knock on wood, for probably about 3 years or so. So, um,
So
uh,
in that case, it was just you giving him a vacation from the medication that made you realize that. What prompted you to do that? That's an
it,
unusual kind of approach.
it wasn't that, it was that my husband and I were going on vacations,
Oh,
and the
okay.
pet sitter wasn't able to give him his meds. And
Oh,
so
okay.
we would do like very short trips, like maybe he can go 2 days without it. And so then we'd come back and I'd give him his meds as soon as we got home. And then I remember we had to go out of town for like a funeral or something, and it was going to be a longer period of time. And I was very, very worried about him, but it ended up being like 5 days or something. And when we got back, I was like, that's so strange. He's exactly the same. And so I just decided to wait and see before putting him back on the meds. I was like, let's just see what happens. And literally nothing happened. He was perfect. So um I
That's
don't
unusual. Wow. What an
yeah, even though
experience.
it was a misdiagnosis, obviously the meds did not hurt him, which I'm very thankful for. Um and I don't know how the misdiagnosis came around. I mean, he had the same symptoms. He went to the pet ER, and I spoke with the doctor, and he said, definitely heart failure, but apparently it wasn't.
Well,
So,
it's
which I'm
interesting
grateful for.
too that just the set of circumstances that led you to that conclusion. I think it's interesting how, you know, things serendipity. I mean, things just kind
Yeah,
of line up correctly for you to figure all that out.
yeah,
It's pretty good.
yeah. And Peter's case was so complicated, he never could have gone that long without getting his meds. So because I had been through that, I was able to look at Animal and go, well, this is a little bit different. This is strange. He's not exhibiting. I would have expected labored breathing or something along those lines when we came back from being gone, but he was just his normal self.
Yeah, good. Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, yeah.
Was there anything else you'd like to add and share with us about your experiences?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think I covered everything that
Yeah.
I when I went back and read everything that popped up, I had made notes. I think I went over the basics.
Well, it's very interesting, just the similarities that yours seems to be, a bit different than what Luca Max went through, but there are similarities in how they presented and some of the medications. Um, so I'm sure that other people that are experiencing that with their pets, have a diagnosis, can probably appreciate that we've been through something similar. And sometimes when your pets are going through things, it's kind of feel isolating, and so
Mm-hmm.
maybe just knowing that others are going through it or have gone through it can be a comfort. And I know that people, they can always utilize us as a resource if they have questions. We're not veterinarians, but if they have questions, they can certainly reach out and we can share what we went through and maybe something that we tried or just having somebody that understands sometimes helps. So
Yeah.
be out there if you'd like to utilize Jennifer or myself, we're open to that.
Yeah. And when Luca Max threw his blood clot, did your vet say anything like, again, my vet said that that was normal for heart failure. When we moved down here, an animal was diagnosed, and I told him what I went through with Peter. The vets down here said that pretty much once they throw a blood clot, that's it. Like they don't recover from that. And I was like, my cat had had like 6 blood clots, and he recovered every time. So I'm curious as to your what kind of feedback you got on that.
Well, they didn't know in the beginning what was going on, why his legs were dragging. They knew for certain that there was a heart issue, and they for certain knew that he needed these specific medications. And we saw the evidence that that worked.
Okay.
It was a little bit later, not long. I think it was his second checkup, his first initial exam, where everything was diagnosed, and then a follow-up visit is when it was determined that it might possibly be that there was a blood clot in that. Um, I don't know the technical terms, but they're the split
Right.
um, vessel. Um, and so it really indicated that that's probably what it was. But there was no clear evidence that, yes, 100% this is what happened. But that is what they they believe is what happened.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
so
that's what it sounds like to me. Not a vet
yeah,
over here, but
and the fact that the medication that pulled the fluid off the heart
hmm.
could have maybe helped with the flow, so that all got moving in that vessel, or broke up the clot, or maybe it was small enough to begin with, and it just was enough to cause the dragging. Some of those details we're not 100% clear on, but we
Sure.
can make they can the doctors can make some very uh, good assumptions, I guess you could say. Some of those things
Right.
it's hard to diagnose unless you go into some, very expensive in-depth tests. And at that point, we felt like, it's cleared up. The cause is interesting, and I like to know those sorts of things so that we can help, be aware, maybe prevent in the future. But it wasn't something that we really felt like we needed to move forward with going into some heavy duty testing. And actually, after it had cleared up, I don't know that we could have done much to test for it, but
Right. Yeah.
it
Yeah. I
just
mean,
made a lot of sense.
yeah, it mirrors kind of what happened to Peter. So, based on what your vet said, that's probably most likely what it was. And he
Yeah,
hasn't had any more issues since then with his
no.
legs. Oh, that's great.
He's lost his appetite a couple of times, which
Hmm.
was very concerning because I was, thinking that the whole thing would kind of cycle back around. But let's see, what did I do back then? I think I went back to the tuna. So I had him, he was eating tuna. That was the only thing he would eat. And then I kind of weaned him off of it because the high salt, and um, it doesn't have any extra, it doesn't have the taurine or any of the extra
Right.
nutrients that they need. So I wanted him to get on something that was more balanced. And so I got him off of it. But when he stopped eating, I went ahead and tried it again. And he ate it for a little while, but he wasn't as interested as he was the first time.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
We had great success with Fancy Feast. Um, but every cat is different.
Yeah,
So,
we tried everything. We tried those little squeezable, the pouchy
uh-huh.
things, and Fancy Feast and Friskies, all the different flavors. And um, the AD formula was something I really thought would work because they usually like that. I don't know how I landed on tuna. I think I made myself a tuna sandwich one day and he freaked out, really was like not leaving me alone. I think that's how I landed on that. At first it was just the juice, and then I started giving him the meat
Yep.
as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we did something very similar with Peter. At that point, it was just about getting any nutrients into his body.
Yeah.
Um, I will say again, I don't know if this is normal, but the end was I had woken up one morning and Peter had vomited about 10 times within half an hour.
Oh goodness.
He was very, very, very interested in water, but couldn't seem to bring himself to drink. He was sitting right by the water fountain, but like not willing to drink anything. And his breathing again was very labored. I gave him his Lasix, which my vet had told me always up the Lasix if he's having breathing difficulties, and it would work within minutes. And there was no difference. And that was when I knew that things were very different. And I took him back to the pet ER at that point, and they said that they recommended euthanasia. And I waited for our vet to open and took him back and talked to my vet, and he said, I think this is the end. And he looked over him and said that there was nothing else that could be done. We had tweaked all the meds as much as we could. The Lasix wasn't working. He was vomiting prolifically. So I don't know if that's normal, but that's kind of what I went through. And sometimes it can be really hard to see, especially when they rally so many times. It can be hard to see end stages or to know when to make that determination. I had even said, how do I know he's not going to rally tomorrow? He's rallied so many times. How do I know I'm making the right decision for him? Um, but yeah, looking back, that time was quite different from what he had been through previously.
Well, so Luca Max, he's actually living with six other kitties, so there's seven total in Alley Cat Flat. But somebody's been vomiting, not a lot, but there's just over the last couple of days, there's been some. So now that you said that, I'm a little nervous.
Yeah,
So
I again
just,
like with Pete,
I'll keep an eye on
sorry.
it. It's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, just go
Yeah,
ahead.
with Peter, it was obvious that it was him. I woke up, somebody had threw up. I was preparing food and whatnot, and he was just continuously vomiting. It was like within a very short period of time. So
Yeah,
it was obvious. And like I said, I gave him his emergency meds, the Lasix, and it didn't make a difference in his
yeah,
breathing. So it was different that time. Again, not a vet, don't know if that is normal. Hopefully that's not what you're seeing. But it was just kind of what I had dealt with in case, anybody experiences that.
yeah. Oh, goodness gracious, you've gone through so much with your babies. Um,
Yeah.
I know that's just one story amongst many.
Yeah.
And perhaps, you can share some more things with your all of your experience on another podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Lots of stories over here and you too.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your experience with us, and I'm glad that your animals have such good care. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to close with?
No, no, I think that's it. Thank you for having me and listening. And, again, just number one thing, have a vet that you trust explicitly.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah. Okay.
So that is all for today for our podcast with Jennifer Perdue. Our next podcast will be with Brittany Hassel, Dr. Hassel. She is a veterinarian at the Cabinet Animal Clinic, and she's going to be discussing heartworm disease in dogs. So stay tuned for that. And that will wrap up our February American Heart Month with a focus on cats and dogs and heart disease. So I always like to say, same cat time, same cat channel. but dogs rule. And we'll talk to you next time. Have a wonderful day.